And of course, we could both just imagine that if anyone ever used this argument against Sam Harris or Douglas Murray, as they easily could, say, "Hey, Douglas Murray, you don't have any training in gender studies, and therefore you can't have this comment about transgenders," or you say the same thing about Sam Harris with Black Lives Matter or something like that. You would watch them tear apart that nonsense with the exact arguments that me and you are making on this podcast. Like they would
Yeah.
flip around and take my exact position, and they'd be 100%
Yes,
correct
yeah.
to
That's a
say,
good point.
screw that. You got to either take on my argument or you can't take on my argument. Like it's one of the others. And so it's sad to see them using the exact same argument. When that if that happened to them, which easily could, they would respond with exactly what I am saying.
Yeah, and I think I might have seen segments like that, like with Sam and his criticisms of Islam, right? People, or even with the identity politics, Black Lives Matter, gender studies. I've seen stuff like far left people like, oh, this guy Douglas Murray writing a book on gender and race relations, and yet where's his PhD in gender studies? He doesn't know what he's talking. He doesn't understand all the sociological impacts of the racist patriarchy. And I think I've seen stuff, particularly with like Islam, of like Sam Harris is not an Islamic theologian. What the hell is he saying? Or like say with the Bible, that's a very common one too. Like Jordan Peterson, like he's not an expert in biblical analysis. Like why is he talking about this stuff? And yet, like I find Jordan Peterson's stuff on the Bible actually more interesting than what the mainstream, dogmatic Christian theologians take on those things. Let's keep going to the next one.
Tom Stoppard memorably, incredibly describes it. But people like him who are doing this, I just warned him. I said, you must know, because he said something like, there's this sort of fertile ground at one moment. I said, you're doing the watering of it. Mm-hmm. You're watering this. You're bringing it up. You're conspicuously engaged in the process of trying to grow an extremely poisonous tree, and it's going to get you and then all of us, by which I mean, of course, you encourage the most ugly, debunked, destructive bigotries of human history. And they are always ones which, once they flourish and once they grow, burn everyone.
Yeah, so but
this is just so ridiculous. So, okay, let me just start first. First of all, yes, there's been a rise in anti-Semitism, conspiracy thinking, blaming the Jews for everything. And yes, if you say anything, right, if I bring up in my reporting, or Jay Bhattacharya did, about the dangers of mRNA vaccines and young people and myocarditis, yes, some people will take that and be like, oh, that means all vaccines are bad. And, oh, you have some really crazy people who say, oh, that's in line with our view of the genocide of vaccines and autism and all this stuff. But it's that's not how you argue, right? That's not how you talk. And there's actually one example with, do you remember this back in the day? And this is why Sam Harris has been a big part of my intellectual development. When he had Charles Murray on, and then Ezra Klein attacked him for doing that podcast because he brought Charles Murray brought up the race IQ controversial thing. And then Ezra Klein's point was, you doing this podcast and having on this guy encourages racism. It encourages people to think that people of a certain skin color have lower IQ. And you're essentially, he said, you're watering this fertile ground of racism, and you're being incredibly irresponsible for having on a guy saying that. And it's like, again, yes, when you say anything, there's going to be certain people that read into that and take it to an extreme, but that's not a point against the actual arguments of the matter. And lastly, with Douglas in particular, his book, Strange Death of Europe, his criticisms of Islam, and very cogently, very eloquently articulated about clashes within societies that don't value women's rights, gay rights, free speech, letting mass numbers of those people in could create a clear clash. And we have examples like Sweden and France, where there's these no-go zones, people coming from Middle Eastern and African countries who clearly don't respect women's rights. Like, all that is 100% true. And yet for sure, you have people who will read and watch Douglas Murray talk about that, who then end up saying Muslims are inferior people, they have low IQ, they're monsters, all Muslims are like ISIS. There's for sure been that. And he said, I think in your podcast, that he's called that out, and he's been very careful in calling that out. I haven't seen him do that. I'm taking his word. I'm sure he said that at some point. I'm sure. But again, if you want to use that as an argument, then Douglas Murray should never talk about the dangers of mass migration from Muslim majority countries, because that will inevitably increase Islamophobia. But you should still talk about it, even if it encourages some crazy people to take it to an extreme.
Yeah, it's funny that you brought up that example, because that was somewhere in the back of my mind. I've not thought about that in years, but that's right. And when Sam Harris, I remember he had like a response podcast, like a solo podcast about the controversy of having Murray on a show, not Douglas Murray, Charles Murray on a show.
Yeah.
And one of the points that he made was that how when they were mapping out the human genome, they found out that, or at least this is the belief, that white Europeans share some DNA in common with Neanderthals, but that black people don't. And he was like, now imagine those results had been the opposite. Imagine it had been that we found that black people shared DNA with Neanderthals. Now you could see where that would be used by a lot of racists. But if we found that, we still have to say that we found that. Like, science can't be in the business of not telling the truth just because it may lead to other. So again, with both of these guys and all of these pathetic like arguments, all you got to do is listen to them two yesterday to disprove what them two today are saying. Again, this and I did, of course, I hit back and made that exact point in the debate, and the answer was like totally pathetic, because if Douglas Murray is going to say, well, I am very careful to make sure I don't encourage that, well, much like you, I've never actually heard that from Douglas Murray. I've never heard in any of his comments about how. Now, again, I'm not saying he's never done that.
Yeah, I'm sure he's done it.
I'm sure he has.
Yeah, he doesn't say it every time he talks about it. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And so have I. I've gone out of my way to say, like, I don't like the Jew hating stuff. I don't think that's the right answer. I don't like racialism. I don't like any of that stuff. But I'm sorry, it's a little bit weird. It's very, I'll just say that of all of the woke claims of victimhood, which I consider this to be in that category, but of all the woke claims of victimhood, I gotta say the Jewish one just is the weakest. It's like by far the weakest of any of them. I mean, look, there's no question, as you said, there's been a rise in Jew hatred over the last 18, 19 months. There's no question about that. But there's also been a rise and a continuation of the most dehumanizing bigotry toward the Palestinians. I mean, and to a level that just simply does not exist with the Jew hatred. I mean, I've had in multiple debates that I've done on the Israel-Palestine topic, I've had my opponents argue to me that Palestinians do not have rights, including the women and children. I've had other people argue to me that there's no such thing as innocent Palestinians. And this is as they are getting slaughtered. Now, I'm sorry, like maybe that does exist. I have not heard anyone making that argument against Jews, certainly not anyone who's like in a respectable debate or anything like that. And so, yeah, like dehumanizing bigotry against any entire group of people is bad. And telling inconvenient truths can always lead toward that. And so there's an interesting conversation there about like the responsibility that all of us have about guarding against that. Obviously, the conclusion is not stop telling the truth, if that might lead to bigotry. But again, it's just not a point against me in the debate. Douglas Murray and Sam Harris are every bit as guilty of this, if not more guilty of this than I am. And again, it's like, there is one of the reasons why the Jewish claim of victimhood, and I say this as a Jewish person, but one of the reasons why the Jewish claim of victimhood is the weakest is that Jews are thriving. Like, Jews aren't a marginalized group that is, like whatever the comment about Black people in America is, there certainly are real issues in the Black community. Now, you could argue what's causing that, and that's a topic for a very long conversation, and probably much more than that. And there's been many books written on the subject, but that's just not the case with Jews. And the truth is that if you're talking about anti-Muslim bigotry, well, what have you been watering, Douglas Murray and Sam Harris? Since I was 18. So I'm 42 now, but so in basically your lifetime, okay, since you were born, there's been how many millions of innocent Muslims killed in US-led wars? probably between 3 to 4 million, something like that, between Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Somalia, Yemen, the drone bomb campaign in Pakistan. Now, if you want to add into that the destruction of Gaza, which of course is totally funded and armed by the US. I mean, so you want to talk about like, look, anti-Muslim bigotry, you could point to like a lot more disastrous results than you can with that. But again, I'll say all of it's wrong. Nobody's supporting like dehumanizing entire groups of people. But again, by their own logic, they're more guilty of it than I am.
Yeah, it's with all these things. I think this is an interesting pattern I'm spotting where they mention a general problem, but it doesn't apply to you. Just like with all the other stuff, you haven't been there, you're not an expert, you're just you're just a comedian. You don't want Dave Smith operating on you in brain surgery, or in this case, the rise in anti-Semitism. It's like, yes, like all those are real. Conspiracy thinking is a real problem. Yes, you should go to places and discover them and whatever. And yes, anti-Semitism is a real problem, but like, how does that apply to Dave? Like, it's like, if he had said anti-Semitism is a real problem, look what you're watering. Look what you said in this thing. Look this claim that I'm bringing up in this podcast, where you said that Israel is conspiring with the WEF and doing this, and it's part of some broad program to suppress other people who are not Jewish. And like, look what you. It's like that didn't happen. He didn't point to anything that you said that was anti-Semitic. He just brought up anti-Semitism. It's like it's such a stupid woke tactic. Where it's like you can do the same shit about them, right? Talk to Douglas Murray about his criticisms of Islam and be like, well, do you know the rise in anti-Islamic bigotry? Do you know this like one kid in this one high school got bullied for being Muslim? Look at what you're watering with the strange death of Europe. What are you doing, man? It's like you could play that game and then suddenly like people might be sensitive to that and be like, oh my God, Douglas might be watering Islamophobia. But that's not a real argument against his incredible book, The Strange Death of Europe.
Right. And like I said on the last clip there, and if someone made that argument to Douglas Murray, he would respond exactly as I'm responding right now and tear it apart. It's just, this is what's so sad about it. It's like the hypocrisy is just so overwhelming. And again, like this is what, if you go watch the Rogan episode, as many have, this is what he did throughout the whole debate. Like it'd be like at one point, like we'd be debating and I'd argue something specific and I'd go like, I'd say the National Endowment for Democracy and the USAID poured $100 million into the Maidan Revolution. So you can't just say this was some organic revolution when the US poured $100 million into it. And his response would be, sometimes libertarians like to act as if everything done in the world was done by America and we're the only actors in here. And you're like, yeah, that sure would be stupid if that's what I had said. But what I said was that the NED and the USAID poured $100 million into the Maidan Revolution. Could we take on that? And then the answer is no. He has no response to that. So it's always like, again, the through line through all of this, it's a very convenient way to never have to take on a single argument because they can't.